International Rules of War. Source, FT, NPR. By visualgk.com. The rules of war, derived from international treaties, humanitarian law, and so-called customary law, that is, common practices, that have become accepted. They reflect the experiences of the most destructive conflicts, including the Second World War, through instruments, such as the 1949 Geneva Conventions. The laws cover areas, including the rights of states to defend themselves, the degree of force they may use, and the protection of non-combatants. History of the rules of war. Although our modern rules of war can be traced back to ancient civilizations and religions, it was Henri Dunant, the founder of the Red Cross, who began the process of codifying these customs into international humanitarian law. In 1864, he helped establish the first Geneva Convention, an international treaty that required armies to care for the sick and wounded on the battlefield. Over the next 85 years, diplomats debated and adopted additional amendments and treaties to address the treatment of combatants. In 1949, after the horrors of World War II, diplomats gathered again in Geneva to adopt 4 treaties that reaffirmed and updated the previous treaties and expanded the rules to protect civilians. They're now collectively known as the Geneva Conventions of 1949. Six main rules of war. No targeting civilians. Intentionally targeting civilians, buildings such as schools or houses, and infrastructure like water sources, or sanitation facilities, is a war crime. Killing or injuring a person who has surrendered, or is no longer able to fight, is also prohibited, as is punishing someone for an act that another person, even a family member, has committed. Attacks should only be directed at military objectives, and military bases and stockpiles should not be placed in, or near populated areas. No torture, or inhumane treatment of detainees. Torture and other forms of cruel, degrading, or ill treatment are expressly prohibited. The lives, rights, and dignity of detainees should be preserved. They must be given food and water, protected from violence, and allowed to communicate with their families. There are no exceptions to this rule, even when torture might elicit life-saving information. No attacking hospitals and aid workers. The wounded and sick always have a right to be cared for, regardless of which side of the conflict they're on. Medical and aid workers must be protected by all warring parties and allowed access to collect and care for the wounded and sick. If combatants see a Red Cross or Red Crescent, symbols of the National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, they should know that person or place should not be attacked. Provide safe passage for civilians to flee. Parties to a conflict must take all reasonable steps to evacuate civilians from areas where there is fighting. In the heat of conflict, such steps can take the form of advanced warnings, or the creation of safe corridors for civilians to leave a besieged city, and for humanitarian workers to deliver aid and services. Civilians must never be blocked from fleeing. Provide access to humanitarian organizations. Civilians and militants, who are no longer fighting in the conflict, have a right to receive the help they need, whether it's medical care, food, water, or shelter. This means that restricting the delivery of humanitarian aid, through naval and air blockades, closing ports, or confiscating supplies, is prohibited. In fact, deliberately causing starvation and hunger is a war crime. No unnecessary or excessive loss and suffering. The tactics and weapons used in war must be proportionate and necessary to achieve a definitive military objective. The use of weapons that are by nature indiscriminate is prohibited. For example, the use of landmines, while not banned, is limited because they can indiscriminately kill and maim both combatants and civilians. Please like, share and subscribe. visualgk.com